I want to talk about the supply and demand project for Algebra 2. Just a couple things for you to be aware of as you're looking at the directions for the project. You're going to notice that some of the symbols are missing when you're looking at the equations in GradPoint. So if you go to the supply and demand project worksheet, you're going to see that those equations will show up. All right, so you're going to find that that's going to happen on several pages. You see they're missing here and here and also down here for the demand function that they are giving you. So here's the equation for the demand function. This should be the square root of 2x times 100,000. Okay, and it's represented by this graph right here. Okay, on the next page, they're going to ask you to create a function that models the supply of your product that you're creating. Now, you're going to make this equation up. Okay, it just needs to meet certain conditions. So it needs to start with this symbol. So S of X equals, and then you're going to write the equation that you're going to use. It needs to start with January 1st with a supply of 0. That's very similar to your demand function, so it needs to start January 1st at 0. And then it says you must meet demand by April 1st. Okay, so here's April, or April 1st, and at this point, your graph for the supply graph needs to cross your demand curve before this date. Okay, so anytime before April 1st. And then it wants you to predict when the supply will meet the demand. It predicts when that will happen. And then after the date when the supply first meets demand, supply must always exceed demand. So let's say that they cross right here at this point. The supply and demand curve will be the same at this point. Any value after that needs to be greater. So your graph needs to be the graph for your supply curve needs to be above your demand curve. And then it asks you to keep the difference between the supply and demand to a minimum to prevent costly storage of your product. Okay, so the difference between them needs to be pretty small. Doesn't have to be terribly small, but it's not far apart from each other. Okay, it can be a piecewise function. So you can have a graph that maybe starts as a straight line and then turns into a curve.